To crush the wretch, in the sense of Voltaire, or to attain the destruction of the altars of that God whose worship had been taught by the apostles, nothing less could suffice than the total subjection of the public opinion, and the annihilation of the faith of all Christian nations. To extirpate it by force was above the strength of the rising coalition. Force was only to be resorted to when, by a revolution in all religious ideas, things had been brought to that state in which our Jacobin legislators found them, or when, by infidelity, the courts, the senates, the armies, in short, men of all descriptions, had been gained over to a blind confidence in and submission to their sophistry. Indeed, the necessary growth of impiety and corruption supposed too long a period for Frederick or Voltaire ever to flatter themselves with the hope of seeing it. It was then too early for them to grasp the falchion of the butchering Jacobin. Nor must we expect in the following pages to read of guillotines or forced requisitions in battle array against the altars of Christianity. In the beginning, their intrigues are hidden and silent, slow and tortuous, but more insidious from their secrecy, more certain from their slowness. The public opinion was to perish, as it were, by inanition, before they dared lay the axe to the altar. This mode of proceeding, we find, is perfectly understood by Frederick when he writes to Voltaire that to undermine the edifice in silence is to oblige it to fall of itself. And still better understood by d'Alembert when upbraiding Voltaire with being too hasty, he says, "If mankind grow enlightened, it is because we have used the caution to enlighten them by degrees." Convinced of the necessity of this gradation, d'Alembert bethought himself of the encyclopedia as the grand means of philosophizing mankind and of crushing the wretch. His project is no sooner conceived than it is enthusiastically adopted by Diderot and Voltaire, more than once animated their drooping courage. His project is no sooner conceived than it is enthusiastically adopted by Diderot, and Voltaire more than once animated their drooping courage by his constant attention to the undertaking. To judge of what prodigious importance the success of this famous dictionary was to conspiring chiefs, we must be acquainted with its plan, the method of its execution, and how it was to become the infallible agent of infidelity, and its most powerful weapon in perverting the public opinion and overturning all the principles of Christianity. The encyclopedia is at first ushered into the world as the aggregate, the complete treasure of all human arts and sciences, of religion, divinity, physics, history, geography, astronomy, and commerce. In a word, of whatever can constitute a science, of poetry, oratory, grammar, painting, architecture, manufactures, and whatever can be the object of useful or pleasing arts. This great work was to comprehend the very minutiae of different trades, from the manufacturer to the laborer. It was to be of itself an immense library, and to supply the place of one. It was to be the work of scientific men, the most profound in every branch that France could produce. The discourse in which it was announced by d'Alembert to all Europe was written with so much art and had been so profoundly meditated and so nicely weighed. The concatenation of the sciences and the progress of the human mind appeared so properly delineated. Whatever he had borrowed from Bacon or Chambers on the filiation of ideas, so completely disguised. In short, the plagiary sophister had so perfectly decked himself in the plumage of others that the prospectus of the encyclopedia was looked upon as a masterpiece, and its author, of course, considered as the most proper person to preside over so stupendous a work. Such were the mighty promises, but these were never intended to be fulfilled, while, on the other side, they had their secret object, which they were determined to accomplish. This was to convert the encyclopedia into a vast emporium of all the sophisms, errors, or calumnies which had ever been invented against religion, from the first schools of impiety to the day of their enterprise. And these were to be so artfully concealed that the reader should insensibly imbibe the poison without the least suspicion. To prevent discovery, the error was never to be found where it might be supposed. Religion was not only to be respected, but even advocated in all direct discussions, though sometimes the discussion is so handled that the objection they seem to refute is more forcibly impressed on the mind of the reader. The more to impose on the unthinking, D'Alembert and Diderot artfully engaged several men of unblemished character to partake in this vast and laborious undertaking. Such was Mr. de Jaucourt, a man of great learning and probity, who has furnished a number of articles to the encyclopedia. His name alone might have been thought sufficient to guarantee against all the art and perfidy of its principles. And it was further declared that all points of religion were to be discussed by divines well known for their learning and orthodoxy. All this might have been true, and yet the work only proved the more perfidious. For D'Alembert and Diderot had reserved to themselves a threefold resource for forwarding the anti-Christian conspiracy. Their first resource was that of insinuating error and infidelity into those articles that might be deemed the least susceptible of them, such, for example, as history or natural philosophy, and even into chemistry and geography, where such danger could not have been surmised. The second was that of references, a precious art, by which, after having placed some religious truth under the reader's eye, he is tempted to seek further information in articles of a quite different cast. Sometimes the mere reference was an epigram or a sarcasm. They would, for instance, after having treated a religious subject with all possible respect, simply add, "See the art," prejudice, or superstition, or fanatism. See the art, prejudice, or superstition, or fanatism. Lastly, when our referring sophisters feared this shift could not avail them, they would not hesitate at altering and falsifying the discussion of a virtuous cooperator, or at adding an article of their own, whose apparent object was to defend, while its real intention was to refute what had already been written on the subject. In fine, impiety was to be sufficiently veiled to make it attractive, but at the same time to leave place for excuse and subterfuge. This was the peculiar art of our barking sophister, D'Alembert. Diderot, more daring, was at first countenanced in the mad flights of his impiety, but in cooler moments his articles were to be revised. He was then to add some apparent restriction in favor of religion, some of those high-sounding and reverential words, but which left the whole of the impiety to subsist. If he was above that care, D'Alembert, as supervisor general, took it upon himself. Peculiar care was to be taken in the compiling of the first volumes, lest the clergy, those men of prejudice, as they were called, should take the alarm. As they proceeded in the work, they were to grow more bold, and if circumstances did not favor them, nor allow them to say all they wished to say, they were to resort to supplements and to foreign editions, which would at the same time render this dangerous work more common and less costly to the generality of readers. The encyclopedia, perpetually recommended and cried up by the adepts, was to be a standing book in all libraries, and insensibly the learned was to be converted into the anti-Christian world. If this project was well conceived, it was impossible to see one more faithfully executed. It is now our duty to lay before the reader the proofs, first as to the fact, secondly as to the intention. For the first, it will be sufficient to cast the eye on diverse articles of this immense collection, especially where the principal tenets of Christianity or even of natural religion are treated, and to follow them through the diverse references which the sophisters have prepared for the reader. We shall find the existence of God, free agency, and the spirituality of the soul treated in the style of a Christian philosopher. But ad vide, demonstration, or a vide corruption, will be added to pervert all that had been said. And the article to which D'Alembert and Diderot more particularly refer the reader are exactly those where the doctrine of the skeptic or the Spinozist or the fatalist or the materialist is chiefly inculcated. This cunning could not escape those authors who wrote in the defense of religion. But Voltaire, resorting to calumny in order to defend their encyclopedia, would represent these authors as enemies of the state and bad citizens. Such indeed were his usual weapons, and had he perfectly succeeded in deceiving people, it would have been sufficient to have examined his confidential correspondence with the very authors of the work to be convinced of the wickedness of their intentions. At 100 leagues from Paris and not thwarted by the obstacles which D'Alembert had to combat, he often complains that the attacks are not sufficiently direct. He is often ruffled by certain restrictions usual to D'Alembert, and at length he breaks out on those which are visible in the article Bail. D'Alembert answers, "This is an idle quarrel, indeed on Bayle's dictionary. In the first place, I did not say happy would it have been had he shown more reverence to religion and morality. My phrase is much more modest, and beside, in a cursed country like this where we are writing, who does not know that such sentences are but a mere matter of form, and only a cloak to the truths additionally conveyed? Every one is aware of that." During the time that Voltaire was buried with the articles he so frequently sent to D'Alembert for the encyclopedia, he often complained of his shackles, and was unable to dissemble how much he desired to attack religion openly. He writes, "All that I am told about the articles of divinity and metaphysics grieves me to the heart. Oh, how cruel it is to print the very reverse of what one thinks!" But D'Alembert, more adroit, sensible of the necessity of these palliatives, lest he should be looked upon as a madman by those whom he wished to convert, foresaw the day when he could triumphantly answer, "If mankind is so much enlightened today, it is only because we have used precaution, or had the good fortune to enlighten them by degrees." When Voltaire had sent certain violent articles under the name of priest of Lausanne, D'Alembert would immediately write, "We shall always receive with gratitude whatever comes from the same hand. We only pray our heretic to draw in his claws a little, as in certain places he has shown his fangs a little too much. This is the time for stepping back to make the better leap." And to show that he never lost sight of this maxim, he answers Voltaire's animadversions on the article Hell. "Without doubt, we have several wretched articles in our divinity and metaphysics, but with divines for censors, and a privilege, I defy you to make them better. There are articles less exposed, where all is set to rights again." Can there be a doubt left of the precise and determined intention of the encyclopedists, when Voltaire exhorts D'Alembert to snatch the moment whilst the attention of government is drawn off by other concerns? During this war with the Parliament and the bishops, the philosophers will have fine play. You have a fair opportunity of filling the encyclopedia with those truths that we should not have dared utter 20 years ago. Or when he writes to Damilaville, "I can be interested by a good dramatic performance, but could be far more pleased with a good philosophical work that should forever crush the wretch. I place all my hopes in the encyclopedia." After such an avowal, it would be useless to seek farther proof of this immense compilation being no other than the grand arsenal for all their sophisticated arms against religion.